All right, we're looking at what? New topic, way up here. Anachronistic mountain strata. The mountains just don't belong where they do if you think of uniformitarianism and hundreds of millions of years. So we're down to this paragraph here. Not only is there no indication, not only is there no indication of where the superposed rocks could have come from, unless, of course, they were normally deposited on top of the underlying Eocene strata, as all appearances indicate. But there is no physical or mechanical explanations of how the 50-odd blocks could all have individually slid into place. Pierce's best guess is simply gravity. Wow. You know, geological explanations get very specific with all this new terminology and so stupidly general because they just, well, maybe the rain did it. We don't know. But he acknowledges this explanation to be essentially inadequate. So his explanation is inadequate, but I'm going to tell you what happened. A close-up of the Heart Mountain thrust plain plainly reveals a lack of any real evidence of thrusting. The really pertinent question is, why is not the entire fault plane heavily brecciated and distorted? It's a violent operation. The fact that there are many places where the contact line is clean-cut and sharp, looking very like a normal bedding plane. Lots of water came in, deposited its stuff quickly. A huge amount of stuff, as it certainly appears to be. That means that at least at this locality, the Eocene series was laid down before the strata of the Ordovician, Devonian, and Mississippian. Uniformitarians and evolutionists, of course, absolutely refuse even to consider. They just don't even consider such a possibility of a worldwide flood. And so we'll continue to call this the Heart Mountain thrust, all physical evidence to the contrary notwithstanding. Where is the thrust? Where's the violence of it? The Lewis overthrust of Montana is one of the most famous and unbelievable of the supposed overthrust regions, being, according to recent estimates, some 350 miles wide and 6 miles thick, with an inferred horizontal displacement of at least 35 to 40 miles. The black rocks on the upper half of the mountain are Precambrian. The lighter colored rocks below, Cretaceous, about 500 million so-called years younger. Although there are slight indications of folding, both above and below the contact line, there are certainly no greater than any other normal unconformity. It is clearly only uniformit's assumption that says that the 350 miles by 40 miles of upper beds were deposited before the lower beds were laid down. And then 350 miles and 40 miles of lower beds were thrust under them later by a force so large that it is not even feasible, and leaving no evidence of such a catastrophic unit. Probably the thrust was big enough to crack the earth in half. It requires a tremendous and entirely unwarranted extrapolation to infer from small-scale folds and thrusts that overthrusting can occur on the infinitely greater scale required to account for the Lewis's overthrust and others like it. If such had occurred, it would seem that every part of the overriding block, 350 miles long and 40 miles wide and 6 miles thick, would be intensely deformed, and that the plain especially would everywhere be brecciated, rock formations consisting of broken up sharp rock fragments and fine-grained sand or clay embedded in other rocks, usually as a result of some great forces imposed upon them, deformed and perhaps metamorphosed. Another difficulty with the concept of the Lewis overthrust is that it should have produced a large mass of broken rock in front of it and along the sides. But this has not been found. Such a gigantic 350-mile slide. Can you imagine that? What's that rock up there? Oh, that rock that's 350 miles long, moving overground, so is now believed to have existed should have scarred and broken the hills and have itself been broken to a greater or less extent, depending upon local conditions. No evidence of either of these things has been found. How many megatons compared to atomic bombs would that have required in terms of power to do that? There's nothing on the Earth that could possibly do that, except worldwide flood and multiple volcanoes and earthquakes all working at the same time. C.P. Ross, Richard Rezac, Rocks and Fossils of Great Glacier National Park. They try to explain these things. When they get there, the things that are easier to explain, but the things on a gigantic scale, it is comedic. The almost perfectly horizontal nature of the Lewis overthrust contact line is revealed in this photograph on page 190. I didn't have the wherewithal to do these photographs. There is certainly no apparent indication of any substantial amount of shearing distortion along the surface. Slight differential movements on the two sides of the bedding plane due to differences in the structural characteristics of shale and limestone have caused some slight distortion, particularly opening up a clear-cut split along the contact. All along this contact line, for at least a half a mile, a very thin 1/16" to 1/8" layer of shale-like material made of fine clay particles is found, adhering in some places to the upper Algonquian limestone and in some to the underlying Cretaceous shales, which are lithogically quite distinct from the layer itself. I wouldn't do well in geology. I can't pronounce these big words. It seems inconceivable that this very fine layer would have been left so intact if the limestone had actually been thrust over the shale of the Lewis overthrust interpretation demands. Careful study of the various locations of the Lewis overthrust showed no evidence of any grinding or sliding action or slicking sides such as one would expect to find on the hypothesis of a vast overthrust. Another amazing fact was the occurrence of two 4-inch layers of altin limestone inserted in the layers with Cretaceous shale. These always occurred below the general contact line of altin limestone and shale. Likewise, careful study of these intercalations showed not the slightest evidence of abrasive action such as one would expect to find if these were shoved forward in between layers of shale as the overthrust theory demands. Violence on a scale just unheard of, and no rubble, not even a little bit of dust, such you can clean it up with your vacuum cleaner. In light of such physical evidence as cited, how is it possible to defend any longer the grand fiction of the Lewis overthrust? There ought to be no reasonable doubt that the limestones were actually deposited after the shales on which they lie, and therefore they are younger in geologic age. The problem of overthrusting becomes still more difficult when an attempt is made to understand it from the viewpoint of engineering and mechanics. The mass of rock in the Lewis overthrust slab, for example, must have weighed approximately 800,000 billion tons. What could pick that up? Well, maybe what was that, the unknown ape or whatever. Anyway, assuming for the sake of argument that sufficient force could somehow be generated in the Earth's crust, which, by the way, would not be a normative uniformitarian event by any stretch of the imagination, to start such a mass moving with both a vertical and lateral component, moving vertically against the force of gravity and laterally against the friction force along the sliding plane. It still does not follow that really large blocks could be moved in this manner. It can be calculated on the basis of known friction coefficients for sliding blocks that so much frictional shearing stress would be developed in a large block that the material itself would fail in shear and or compression and therefore could not be transported as a coherent block at all. Yet that's what they say happened. As Hubert Ruby points out, consequently, for the conditions assumed, the pushing of a thrust block whose length is of the order of 30 kilometers or more along a horizontal surface appears to be a mechanical impossibility. That's from Hubert and Ruby. So, the impossibility is compounded, of course, when it is noted that the block does not simply move along a horizontal plane, but must also move vertically in order to ride up over the strata on the other side of the fault plane. Wow. That's how you make movies, but they're called cartoons. Finally, consider the Matterhorn and other mountains in the Alps. We got the Matterhorn. The famous Swiss mountain is only one of many in the Alps that are out of the standard geological order. The Matterhorn is supposed to have been thrust from some 30 to 60 miles away over younger rocks with substrata in the equally famous Mythen Peak of the Alps are in ascending order Eocene, Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous, and it was thought to have been pushed all the way from Africa into Switzerland. Wow! Maybe somebody's golf cart did that. The principle of uniformity is unable to yield a real understanding of the processes by which the great tectonic structures of the Earth have been produced, and this is exactly what we have been contending. Now, in the deluge hypothesis, it is postulated that the Earth's great complex of faults and folds was produced fairly rapidly when the strata was still soft and plastic, in the order that they appear in today without any massive rearranging type thrusting processes. No mysterious and unknown properties of the materials or extravagant attributes of the time dimension need to be invented at all. So much for that. Matterhorn. Coral reefs. There's another anomaly so far as evolutionists and geologists are concerned. Other types of sedimentary deposits, which have been conceived as long-time accumulations, can also be otherwise explained. For example, the great coral reefs, which appear to represent the accumulations of the calcium carbonate remains of the coral organisms over eons of time, could just as well have been formed in relatively short periods. The total mass of material in a reef is a function not only of time, but also of numbers of the multiplying reef-building corals. There is little direct evidence relating to the vertical rate of growth of coral reefs, but such as is available is compatible with the hypothesis of fairly rapid growth. Little has been discovered of the growth rate of reefs by direct measurement. Sluter found that a new reef, established in Krakatoa after the eruption of 1883, had grown to a thickness of 20 centimeters in 5 years, or 4 centimeters per year. But other investigators have estimated the reef growth at 0.1 to 5 centimeters per year. There's P.H. Kuhnen in his book on marine geology. This rate of growth could certainly account for most of the coral reef deaths found around the world, even during the few thousand years since the deluge. It is also possible that many coral reefs are of deceptive thickness. Many colonies of coral reefs, just go down here, are round and with little or no clear, perfect boulders. When such boulders are transported, an appreciable percentage of them will come to rest in positions of growth. Little or become perfect. Okay. When such boulders are transported, an appreciable percentage of them will come to rest in positions of growth, whether they be moved a mile across a reef or a mile downward a seaward talus slope. Even elongated or slab-like colonies may end their journey right straight up. I don't know what that word here. I just kind of interpolate